Well, certainly we have in Busha hundreds of individuals who are civilians who were killed, almost none of them in situations of conduct of hostilities. I mean, they weren't killed by bombing or artillery. They were killed at short range and with an intention to kill or to injure or to maim the person that was next to them. So, certainly even in the Busha situation, hundreds of war crimes were committed, but throughout this area in which evidence has become so available, the areas that Russian forces controlled in the suburbs of Kyiv, which they later withdrew from, I think there are thousands of situations like that.
Now, a 21-year-old Russian tank commander, Vadim Shishimarin, has pleaded guilty to shooting dead a 62-year-old man as he rode his bicycle down a village road in Ukraine's first trial for war crimes committed during the Russian invasion. He said he'll accept any punishment from the court and said he's truly and sincerely sorry. I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want to be there. Well, Stephen Rapp is a former war crimes prosecutor and the former US ambassador at large for war crimes under President Obama in the Office of Global Criminal Justice. He's currently in The Hague working on coordination of support for investigations in Ukraine. Good morning to you, Stephen.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Well, great to speak to you this morning. Tell us, first of all, clearly the first trial was not a significant figure in this conflict. But how important do you think it is that a war crimes trial is already underway in Ukraine?
Well, I think it's extremely important. It shows that the Ukrainian authorities are ready, willing, and able to take these cases on. And it sends a powerful message, certainly when it comes to the treatment of people in other occupied areas, the treatment even of the soldiers who surrendered in the steel plant in Mariupol. That they can't be mistreated, that the Russia needs to comply with the laws of war. Now, of course, the people that we brought into custody certainly won't be initially anybody that's back over in Russia or behind Russian lines, but there will be individuals like this young man who was a tank commander, even though he was 21, who will be captured on the battlefield. He'll be a prisoner of war. Anybody who's captured on the battlefield needs to be treated as a prisoner of war and treated humanely. On the other hand, if there's evidence that they've committed war crimes, they can certainly be prosecuted as they were in this case.
And as we were saying, he has pleaded guilty. Does a case like this, and if it leads to a conviction, does that inevitably lead on to evidence that can help you to identify the more senior commanders, at least the more senior Russian commanders on the ground, if not those who are back in Moscow?
Well, this is all part of a pattern, and we'll see exactly what he says in his statements. We do have the testimony, I think, of a Russian who was in the car with him. He wasn't in the tank. They had shot at a car and then taken over that car and were driving it at a time when they encountered the victim, who was 62 years old, on a bicycle near his home, speaking on his cell phone, and shot him, thinking, oh well, maybe this guy will report on where we are. You don't do that with civilians. Civilians need to be protected. You don't. I mean, obviously, if they feared for this gentleman doing anything to them, they could have detained him or taken away his cell phone or done something else. This becomes an act of murder as a war crime. Okay. Of course, we have much worse crimes. I mean, killing somebody is a horrible crime, but we've got crimes that involve great brutality, incidents of torture and sexual violence before death, and cold-blooded killings, not ones like this where somebody said shoot him inside the car, not somebody who had the right to order him to do it, but other situations where, as we've seen, press reports and videos and videos from the scene, from neighbors, also videos from drones and from satellites that show people being taken behind buildings and killed in cold blood. Each of those are war crimes. Now, of course, charging 21-year-olds is not the same as charging an almost 70-year-old Vladimir Putin in Moscow. But it can inevitably lead to that because these are acts being committed by Russian soldiers, that are under the command of Putin and others. And at least in international courts, the commanders and the leaders are responsible for the acts of the underlings unless they take action to prevent or punish the conduct. And we have certainly no incidents of the Russians having done anything to investigate or to prosecute their own individuals for abusive conduct. Indeed, their whole approach has been to lie and deny.
So you're saying there that you think that a case like this could eventually lead to a war crimes prosecution against President Putin himself?
Well, under international law, if a high-level individual who has effective control over forces fails to act to prevent or punish when he has notice of what they're doing, that he's responsible under the doctrine of command responsibility. Now, Ukraine itself hasn't yet adopted a statute to provide for command responsibility. It was proposed in their parliament. Their own military opposed it. They passed it without command responsibility 2 weeks ago, but then President Zelensky vetoed the bill and said it ain't good enough. And so there'll probably be legislation that goes through. You say, is that retroactive? No. Any country can apply retroactively in its own law, international law that exists at the time. So this may eventually apply in the Ukrainian court. On the other hand, Ukrainian courts can't prosecute the head of state or the senior cabinet officials of a foreign country. They can only prosecute, people like, even General Gerasimov could be prosecuted by it if they could get their hands on it.
Stephen, let me bring in my co-host this morning, Kate McCann.
Good morning, Mr. Rapp. I just want to ask you, you have vastly more experience of war crimes and how they're prosecuted than most people. In the case we're talking about, the 21-year-old, he said, I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want to be there. What is it that happens to people in a war situation that makes them do such terrible things that they almost don't recognise when they get back to some kind of normality?
Well, and indeed, conflicts in which there's death all around you, and death that's not war crimes. Obviously, in a combat situation, it's not a crime to kill an enemy soldier, to even shoot at a distance enemy forces. And one obviously constantly encounters horrible scenes that would, shock the conscience of anyone, and that the journalists are always having to basically avoid and to try to avoid showing the horrors that are there. And certainly one is always in a tense situation, afraid that around any corner somebody could shoot at them, and therefore can negligently or recklessly take shots that they shouldn't. I'm generally sympathetic to soldiers who were in those situations. The penalties often as a result for things that happen in the heat of battle or that are very reactive in the seconds afterwards are often not that heavy, and that the heaviest penalties are reserved for those who sent them there and who frankly encourage, if they don't order, this kind of brutal conduct, or individuals on the field who conduct themselves in horribly brutal ways, or take women off to rape them or to torture individuals and then to brutalize them.
Just very briefly, if you could, Stephen, because we're almost out of time, but I just wonder, I know you're helping with this international support. What is the scale of this investigation? How many war crimes do you think there could be in this conflict?
Well, certainly we have in Busha hundreds of individuals who are civilians who were killed, almost none of them in situations of conduct of hostilities. I mean, they weren't killed by bombing or artillery. They were killed at short range and with an intention to kill or to injure or to maim the person that was next to them. So, certainly even in the Busha situation, hundreds of war crimes were committed, but throughout this area in which evidence has become so available, the areas that Russian forces controlled in the suburbs of Kiev, which they later withdrew from. I think there are thousands of situations like that. Now, I'm not getting into like a Mariupol situation where there was bombardment and in other of these towns in the east, absolute carpet bombing of civilian neighborhoods, and those are war crimes too. And those war crimes can be even more easily attributed up the chain of command. It's more complicated when you have a situation where shots go astray or where a hospital is hit, but it can be argued that next door there was an enemy emplacement, and so it was a mistake, not a crime.
Okay.
But given the pattern of Russian, the way they conduct the wars, they're completely throwing out the book on how conflict should be conducted in built-up areas or anywhere else. So, we are actually talking about tens of thousands of war crimes having been committed here.
Very interesting to talk to you. Stephen Rapp, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you. Take care.
Just a very quick thought on what he was saying there. I mean, yes, we've so far seen this one 21-year-old tank commander put on trial for war crimes, but he was saying, well, we've got hundreds in places like Bucha alone, and if we start looking at what's happening in Mariupol and other areas, could be tens of thousands of war crimes.
Yeah, and I think the scale of this is going to be really difficult to investigate and really difficult, essentially, to try and get to the bottom of who was ultimately responsible. I think that's the difficulty. There is a clear determination within Ukraine to do that, and that's what we're seeing with this first case. But I also thought it was fascinating that Stephen Rapp was saying that he does have some sympathy. It is not easy to understand, but you can start to understand the way that, especially youngsters, 21 years old, in a war zone that you didn't really want to be in, that you didn't understand, that you didn't ask for, you can start to see how some of these factors are at play. Not to excuse it, but you can start to understand it.